Welcome to the One for the Road podcast. My name is Mr. K. Alongside of me, as always, is C Square. Tonight's topic: Trump v. Powell, fight of the decade? Question mark. Uh,
It's a grudge match.
yeah, we're gonna see what's up with these Trump v. Powell beef. We're gonna. Who the heck is Kevin Warsh, who Trump wants to replace Powell with? Why is there a Federal Reserve? Who is Jerome Powell? Where did he come from? I call him Jerry because we're tight. Sprinkle in a couple of questions for C squared to see how brilliantly smart he is. But before that, Trump is furious if Powell has ignored his frequent demands for a swift lowering of the interest rates, and to the point where he's threatening to fire him and replace him. Of course, the liberal media and some Democrats are a little spooked because of that. Again, they think Trump is overstepping his bounds as president, and that Jerome Powell and whoever is the head of the Federal Reserve is supposed to be a independent, unpolitical entity that is in charge of, hopefully, keeping the American economy system humming, inflation down, and the like.
Well, my guess was in charge of lining the pockets of their anonymous masters,
Right,
in the
right.
in banking land.
Banking, yes, yes. Yeah, there's been talks even when the Federal Reserve first came into being, and now that the whole board of governors of the Federal Reserve have massive ties to banks. So they arguably are instruments of the banks, puppets of the bank.
Yep. Well, I mean, the rumor is, and nobody knows for sure, that the New York Fed, which is, JP Morgan and companies like that, really own the Federal Reserve.
Right,
And,
right.
and it's just that they have all their Federal Reserve main branches scattered out all over, but the one in New York really is calling all the shots.
Yeah, yeah. They're in various cities throughout the country. Uh, yeah, so I mean, Trump had thought Powell was going to cut rates at least once, and he hasn't done anything. He's stand pat every time they've had a meeting. Uh, I don't know. I mean, it's only been 3 months. I mean, I think it's a little unrealistic to think there were going to be multiple cuts, and I think it's even unrealistic there'd be one.
Well, I am the Ron Paul of my generation in the aspect of saying I am not a fan of the Federal Reserve. However, I'm not so sure that a rate cut, I'm not sure what you get out of a rate cut. Maybe President Trump should explain what he hopes to get out of a rate cut.
So he's saying he wants interest rates to be cut for Americans to borrow and buy homes, and could improve consumer sentiment and boost stocks. Well, yeah. That
Well,
would
but
happen.
so when you do that, you're finally getting some deflation in the housing market. If I was younger and a buyer, um, I would want that deflation to really set in so that I could pay less for the house, even if I had a bit of a higher interest rate, and then eventually refinance at a lower
Right,
rate.
right, right.
So the bottom line is that why wouldn't you let that cook for a little while? So
Right.
that's not a great explanation. That's
I
actually a
agree.
pretty shoddy explanation. And I like quite a few things that the Don is doing, and I'm not really that overwhelmed by the fact that the market is now more volatile than it was, because I I believe that to be less about tariffs and more about the fact that you had years and years, quite possibly before Joe Biden, quite possibly back to the Trump
First
years,
term.
the end of the Trump term, of fraudulent statistical reporting by the federal government and then quietly revising these numbers wildly different, where it could not be a simple statistical error related to these government numbers that are coming out. It screams fraud. Um, uh, Related to, employment and inflation and all kinds of stuff like that, and the deficit and all, just all across the board on all those quarterly numbers that are reported by the government. So now you're starting to see, I think, some of those real numbers come out, and they're kind of ugly.
Right,
And
right,
so,
right,
okay, you're going to get the stock market to correct down again. It's if you're looking to buy long term, like younger generations would be, then this is a this eventually will be a good opportunity if you take a bit of a haircut on the stock market, which would be if these earnings are not looking good, because now you're unable to use this fraudulent government data and other balance sheet tricks and
right.
buybacks and every trick in the book that they've been using to kind of make their stock prices go up. Then you these prices deserve to be lower, and that adds this possible growth opportunity for longer term investors, which is the younger generation. So the same with the housing data. So I'm not so sure that Powell is in particularly wrong on this
Right.
scenario, because the Donald wants things to scream immediately. And the
Yeah.
thought is that, what will also scream immediately when you do that? Inflation, bud.
Right. Right.
And so the bottom line is that, and I don't want any more inflation. I certainly don't want any energy inflation, because I've been pummeled by that. And so I would say that I'm not, while I'm, again, not a fan of the Federal Reserve, I'm not so sure that the Donald is on the right path on this. I would like to see a better explanation of what we hope to gain out of this, opposed to letting the pot simmer for a while, taking some froth off the top of
Right.
all these markets, the housing market, the stock market, everything. And I know that's probably not a popular position for people who have enjoyed all this asset growth. But you know what? I From that aspect, nothing lasts forever, and you
Right.
need to
Right.
make some corrections to allow for growth.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
that's the bottom line of this. So
Yeah. I can go both ways. There's a devil's advocate argument that's coming up here that Trump has been using. Yeah, I think it's really unrealistic to think that Powell was going to be in line and magically help your tariff news uh, turn out better. So, in my mind, Powell's done a good job and has had inflation targets. And what's really I find a little ironic about this whole thing is, I mean, everybody thought Powell was going to stand pat. I mean, even before the meetings, you have these predictions and analysts saying, okay, given the way the economy's going, he's going to stand pat. And he stand pat, I think, like in February, Trump didn't say boo. But now he's going ballistic because I guess he was expecting Powell to, like, the day after he announces tariffs, to offset the market, to do an emergency cut. I
And
mean,
they're
seems really
backing,
unrealistic.
yeah, and they're backing off the tariffs. That was the art of the deal.
Right.
Now he's backing off this thing, and lots of people are coming to the table to negotiate. So is it really the tariffs that did this, or is it also a combination of all this bogus data and fantasy land that we've been living in for at
Right.
least 4 years, probably more? So
Right.
that from that aspect, I say that um, we're just now getting inflation under control, wild inflation under control.
Right.
Let's let things simmer for a while.
Right.
Do we want to go back to the days of Grandma Yellen and the Bernanke,
No,
which
no,
is
no.
of QE, which was also bizarrely mentioned for a short period of time, and discussion that that was had in Argentina. And so I look at that aspect and say that is a really bad plan. We do not want QE, and
Right.
let's let a return to that, because that essentially created all this potential inflation. And then during COVID and super low interest rates, that was absolutely unleashed, and we saw what it could be. We saw basically ground beef go from $1.99 a pound to friggin' $8 a pound. Dude,
Yeah.
that's 400 freaking percent
Right.
increase. I we would prefer not to see that again. And
Yes.
and
Definitely.
gas at the worst point, I think, in the Joe Biden administration was over $4 in the Midwest. It was probably over $8 in lovely
Cali.
places like the West Coast. So we would prefer not to see that again.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
Gas drives up everything if
right,
that goes up.
exactly. So
Another devil's advocate argument that Trump is making, but that, I mean, it's somewhat ridiculous. He's like, Europe cut 7 times last year. We cut 3, and Europe's humming. Well, one, it's debatable Europe's humming. Two, those rates were during the Biden administration, dude. You weren't in office. You've been
what
in office. You haven't even been in office 4 months. To expect even one rate cut, it was unrealistic.
John, I would love to see the data that shows Europe is humming. What? And
Right.
Europe and China do not look like they're humming whatsoever by the data that
Yes.
I am gathering from some online pundits. Neither of those look like they're true. It looks like they're trying to cut interest rates to save off complete collapse. So why don't we're smarter than you think. Why don't you come out and show us this data that shows that Europe is humming? You got to be kidding me. And
Right.
we are in a global recession, and which was illustrated by the yield curve uninverting, the treasury bond yield curve uninverting before Trump came into office in December 2024. So, you
Right.
know what, boys, I'm not buying it.
Right.
Where is
Right.
this
Yeah.
realistic data that essentially
I didn't.
says, and again, I support lots of things that the Trump administration is doing, but I'm not going to blindly nod my head for stuff that I see that doesn't really have a ton of factual data behind it and
Right.
say, oh, go ahead. No, you're going to be held accountable. That was the whole point. And,
Right.
the whole point of this, election administration is we're tired of letting things run wild in DC. Whoever is sitting
Right.
there is going to be held
Right.
accountable. And
Right, exactly. And one fact is Powell has guided inflation since the Biden administration. During the whole Biden administration, inflation got as high as 9%. Thanks to Powell, it's down to 2.4. And that's what Trump inherited. So he ought to be
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
freaking
right, right,
happy.
right. Now, the 9% was not a happy thing, at that time.
No.
When it was 9%, I'd have
Yeah.
said fire him.
Right. Right.
It's like in
Right.
that point in time, I was basically saying fire him and the entire administration. Unfortunately,
Right.
he was presumably elected, so that wasn't a possibility. But the bottom line is that if we see another scenario like that, going to be quite irate. And
Yeah. I think Trump's I get speed, but come on, we're in the government. I mean, it's
yeah,
never been a
well, I mean,
traditionally agile
well, and,
uh,
and so you've
institute.
done some good things. You've gutted all these expenses. Why don't
Right,
you use some of the money you are recovering by gutting the government and use that to provide some level of subsidies
right, exactly.
to smaller US based corporations that
Yes,
have some potential of creating some growth, creating some jobs and
right,
stuff of that nature. And because that's
yes,
not unheard of. And I will say, while I am not anywhere close to a socialist or a fascist, some good things have happened. And one of them would be considered the entire highway system of the United States was built after
right,
World War II with federal funding. So
right,
there is some realistic perspective that says, yes, the federal government can subsidize some things and get a meaningful result, i.e., I just saw you built this bridge. Okay. Hopefully, it's not a bridge to nowhere. But
right, right,
bottom
right,
line is that I saw you just built this bridge, and and that was worth paying for, opposed to a light rail system that never gets built.
right,
That would be the
right,
negative side of things, and or funding to corporations that I can't track those funds. So we're not saying don't spend any money. You've recouped a lot of money. What we are
yeah,
saying is put that in the right places,
right,
right
right,
controls, the right auditing controls in place to essentially measure that we are getting something and some progress related to that. And by the way, that could potentially put lots of people back to work in the US, and that spurs growth. That spurs purchasing. You know what? It doesn't matter if you lower interest rates back down to 3%. If I'm unemployed, I can't buy a
right,
house anyway. So
right,
that's
right,
a ridiculous thought. And why
right,
don't you keep interest rates where they are and essentially try and unlock some employment here, some meaningful employment that is higher wage with some growth, and that will spur consumer spendings, right?
right. Right, right. I think so. The other thing that people are thinking is he's kind of using Powell as a scapegoat for if the tariffs uh, don't work out. and the
Yeah.
market continues to tank. He's like, well, you should have lowered interest rates. And I don't know. Like you said, I've been on board, especially with the reduction of government, and it just seemed really fat, and there was some corruption, and he's going after these and reclaiming the money. And as you said, that money could be used for good use. But I think the American public are really seeing through this, that you can't blame Powell for your tariff policy. I mean,
Yeah. Right.
it's
Right.
really unrealistic to think that he was going to cut interest rates even once in the last 3.5
Yeah.
months.
And again, you are walking a very thin line for inflation. Okay? So if
Right.
you lower interest rates and spur inflation again with no economic growth and no job
Right.
creation, you have made a massive mess of things, right?
Yes.
So and we've been there and done that. We saw the Joe
Right.
Biden mess of things that had 9% inflation
Right.
uh, and
Even unemployment.
yeah, and high unemployment for the U.S. citizens, and reduction in benefits for U.S. citizens. So the
Right.
bottom line is that obviously that's not going to happen again, but you could easily see the 9%. So you best be careful of what you're wishing for. And the thought of lowered interest rates and any talk of QE, any form of QE again, is absurd. And that is
Right.
ridiculous. If the Fed gets back in that business again, they should be dissolved immediately.
Right. Right. Okay. Question for Chris. What year did Powell become Fed chair, and under what president?
Oh, shucks. Let's see here. So Bush would have been the Bernanke. And let's see here. So Obama was the Bernanke and potentially Grandma. And then Grandma went into I think Grandma went into the Trump. So I'm going to say Trump. How about 2017?
Oh, very good. 2018 Trump.
Yeah, I was.
Very good. Very good.
I should have said 2018 because I knew he had Grandma yelling for a while.
I thought it
It was a
was
train wreck.
Trump 2017 kind of in that, but yes, very good. When does his term end?
Let's see. Fed term is a 12-year term. So how about I think it's a 12-year term. So how about let's see here. It's either an 8 or a 12-year term. So if I was going to say 12 years, I would say either 2030, or if it's an 8-year, it'd be 2026. How about I go
It's
with
an 8 year.
2026?
You're right. It's 8 year,
Oh, okay.
2026. Very
Okay.
good. May
So
of 2026
I
is the
thought I
deadline.
couldn't remember if it was a 12-year term or an
Very
8-year
good.
term, but that's
I did not know that. I had no idea. So, like I said, I make these pretty tough, and yeah, I didn't. I had no idea if they were 8 or 12. They're 8. 2026. Uh, let's see here. Some notes here. So, given that, Trump has been talking to Kevin Warsh. He's a former Fed governor who was previously under Trump's administration. He was considered he was going to be thought to be the Treasury Secretary, but that hasn't turned out. He used to be an executive director in Morgan Stanley. He used to work for Bush. He the interesting part was, and I love how they're calling this the Great Recession under W, when the banks almost went under and
Yeah.
stuff. In that role, he assisted in the Great Recession. Here's what he did: he helped coordinate the sale of Bear Stearns at J.P. Morgan Chase. He also allowed Lehman Brothers to go under.
Yeah.
So that is who Kevin Warsh is his name. That is who Trump has in line to replace Bernanke before or
Well,
after his term expires
yeah.
in May
So, well,
2026.
and the other thing that is a little bit scary about that. So you got the restructuring guy. Why don't we bring back Hank Paulson, who threatened
Oh,
people and then
geez.
went on his knees and started crying to get money, when what should have happened is all the banks should have collapsed, and that was okay with Biden,
Right.
did, and then you would have had to build a new system. So because what did we get?
Yeah.
What did we get from that? We essentially the taxpayers funded the
Oh
that
God.
that operation, and then we all got screwed by the banks again. So
Yes. Yeah.
and we got QE and just wild investment that should have never happened. What should actually happened is that we should have let a bunch of the banks collapse, let a bunch of the global partners collapse, cleared the debt out of the system, and reinstituted Glass-Steagall to essentially get the banks out of the investment business, which was
Right.
pretty much
Right.
illegal
Jeez.
up until 1999, when a bipartisan commission of crooks essentially allowed that to be repealed, allowed Glass-Steagall to be repealed, and which
Yeah.
really was quite possibly the driver to the great financial crisis, was
Right.
allowing
Right.
banks to speculate in those markets. So, I mean that, John, I'm gonna come up with questions off the top of my head for you
Okay.
for a quiz.
Okay. Go for
Now,
it.
what year was the Federal Reserve created?
Oh, I was going to ask you the same question, and I
Oh,
know it.
okay.
1913.
What year was the IRS
Oh, I don't know this
instituted?
one.
Okay, well, I believe it was.
19. Wait, I'll do the IRS. I'll take a guess at the IRS. I knew the Federal Reserve, and I was going to ask you the same question. Federal Reserve is 1913. IRS 1932.
No, but that's a damn good guess. And I believe it was I thought I read in 1910 they were flirting around with the idea, but I believe it was also 1913.
1913.
Coincidence. Well,
Right.
my, isn't that an interesting coincidence? And I don't
Right.
think it was called the Internal Revenue Service at that time. But my, isn't that an interesting coincidence that you passed
Yes. Yes.
all that legislation in the same
Yeah.
congressional session?
Right. Who
And
was the president? Same. Who was the president?
yeah, like Woodrow Wilson, the
Yes.
criminal Woodrow
Yes.
Wilson,
Yes.
and
Ding ding.
ding ding,
That
and
was that was a question I was going to ask you, is when was the Federal Reserve? So you'd have got it.
yeah. So
Yes.
that one, well, so that was a setup, John. I just had to say that because I wanted to make that connection between
Right.
those two institutions.
Yes.
And
Yes. Yes. Back to Warsh. Warsh was on board until there was a he opposed the central bank's plan to buy 600 billion worth of bonds to inject more money into the economy, and that was during the Great Recession, thanks to the
Well,
Bush man.
okay. I did not know that. That's a great fact, and actually,
Yeah.
that's that's actually a plus in his category, if you ask me.
So he's got a few quotes out. Let me read a few quotes of his. This is Kevin Warsh. I want to bounce them off you, see what you think. The president inherited a fiscal and economic and regulatory mess, and it's going to take a little digging out to be on a stronger platform for growth.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the. I'll agree with.
And again, the follow up Rome wasn't built in a day. This is going to take time. I totally agree with
I
that
agree
too.
with both of those. I agree with
Yeah.
both of those.
When asked about the likelihood of Trump's terror stoking inflation, Warsh said that inflation is a choice, and the Fed has made a lot of bad choices over these last several years.
This is very true. And one of those would have been to have interest rates at a super low percentage, which stokes price inflation. And
Right.
so,
Right.
okay, well, so it seems like maybe that is not that is not let me throw out a hypothesis and to you and our viewers. Maybe Trump doesn't really want to lower interest rates. Maybe he just wants to get rid of Jerry Powell. Yeah.
Right.
and
Right.
and 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 install his own guy in
Right.
there, and the guy
Right.
goes in because that statement is in direct contradiction to to oh, let's lower interest rates, let's restart QE. Those last two statements of him not wanting to buy a bunch of treasury bonds and him saying that they've made some incredibly bad choices. Guess what? I agree with you. That sounds great.
Right.
I totally agree
Right.
with you in both
Right.
scenarios. So it doesn't sound like he's on board with lowering interest rates.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
this is just about I told Jerry to do something that he knows is a train wreck because I just want him to leave.
Right.
And
Right.
like that
Right.
hasn't happened in corporations before, and
Or
I
has it
feel like
happened in the
miserable and you know, drummed up a bunch of excuses to get rid of you because I wanted something else. I wanted my friend to have the job. I wanted
right.
whatever. And
Right. Right.
you
Well,
know,
Trump has been known to fire people. He did quite a
well,
bit
but
of
I
that in the
don't
first
know. I'm not sure that
first
he
term.
can fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve. I'm not sure that he has
He doesn't have
that
authorization to
authority
do
to
that.
do that.
Right.
So maybe
He
he was
doesn't.
trying to make his life miserable as I
Right.
can't fire this guy. Maybe I should just make his life miserable
Well,
and leave.
as we pointed out earlier, this is Trump's guy in 2018. Now he isn't.
Yeah, you're right. But I think, Trump made Trump's first term was uh, a plethora of bad decisions, of
Yes.
bad hires and bad decisions. Let's just be honest about
Yes.
that scenario. And, it's like the obviously he was the better choice in 2020 and presumably lost and which is
Right.
questionable, but the bottom line is that he made a huge amount. What he is doing now, John, is what was expected by me
Yes.
in his first
2016.
term to come in
Right.
and start cleaning house with a bunch of people that aggressively knew the federal government was corrupt in its entirety, in most of its entirety. So the
Yeah. I
bottom
mean,
line
26.
is that That did not happen. He
Right.
brought Jerry in, and he brought so many bad picks in, I couldn't even name them all. And so the bottom line is that we'll forgive him for bringing in Jerry Powell. And it's
Right.
like
Right.
the
Yeah. I
thought
mean,
was the thought was is that he would come in and just abolish the Federal Reserve the way he was
right.
talking.
Right.
What happened
Well, he was
to
talking 2016. He ran on draining the
you
swamp,
got
and
it
I don't
right.
even think he dipped his toe into it.
Right, exactly.
I mean, he was like,
Exactly. So
he
that
didn't
was
do anything. Now he is. It's like, geez, all right. I was like, maybe he needed 4 years to figure out how to do it correctly.
yeah, well,
Uh,
I will tell you what, and that is it I'm not sure if that was a slogan or we didn't know what was going on or whatever, but that certainly was nowhere close to drain the swamp. Now we're draining the swamp.
right, right, right. The only other follow up is the Treasury Secretary said he'd be looking for Powell's successors sometime during the fall.
uh
So,
yeah, so whatever, we really don't are not that interested in. You should take the whole thing. Originally there was no Federal Reserve. Originally this all went into the Treasury. How about making your boy the new Treasury Secretary, and then just bringing the whole damn thing into the Treasury. And
right, right. Ron, so back to the Federal Reserve, and your buddy Ron Paul has called for greater transparency and the Fed deliberations, suggesting that public access to meeting minutes could enhance accountability. I totally agree with that.
yeah, right, exactly. But they wouldn't want to do that because then they'd have to go to secret meetings about all the stuff that they're really doing behind the scenes.
Right, right.
And
Uh,
it would look kind of suspicious when all those private jets wound up in the same airport. And
right. And, Powell's background is investment banking and law, and as a lawyer, he was a partner in the Carlyle Group. So that was Powell before he rose to
yeah,
the
they're
Fed chair.
Jerry has actually not been that bad other than the disaster that Biden created, but a partner at the Carlyle Group. We'll have to use that as another episode. Talk about a
Right.
red flag there, man. Good Lord. And
So, last trivia question. Where did Powell graduate? What Ivy League school? I'll give you a hint. What Ivy League school did Powell graduate from? I couldn't get
I
this.
actually have no idea, but I'm going to either guess Harvard or Princeton.
Oh, it's Princeton. Very good.
Yes.
I guessed Yale.
Yeah.
I thought everybody's from Yale.
I
if you're in any
no,
if you're in any
that
position
would
of
be yeah.
power.
The Carlisle group and a degree from Yale would be like 2 out of 3 red flags, and
Right, right, right.
damn chan the I mean you'll look at that aspect and say that fortunately it looks like that scenario has changed substantially in Trump administration too, where we have a bunch of non-Ivy League players playing
Yes,
along, which
yes,
is great.
yes, yes, yes. Very good. This is not a trivia question, but a question. Chris, you've been the head of the Federal Reserve since January 2025. Have you raised or lowered interest rates, or have you stand pat like Powell has?
Absolutely would have stood pat
Right.
um, on that scenario. You know, in all honesty, I don't know what is going on there other than maybe telling their friends, uh, BlackRock, Citadel, all that,
Right.
where things where they would potentially project things to go, you know. Um, uh, so I'm not sure what exactly those folks are doing, and and helping to conduct bond auctions, and
Right. Right.
which have been off and on,
Hmm.
as to how that bidding, you get one auction that has one auction that has a few bidders, and it raises a bunch of red flags, and then you get that another auction. Oh, there was a stellar demand for the 2 year or whatever, and it's like, I'm not sure what's going on there. And
Right.
I really wouldn't want that job. uh,
No, no, no. I wouldn't
Honestly.
want it
So,
either.
the fact of the matter is just oddities going on there. And
Right. Right. Yeah, I don't have a. I stated earlier. I think it's really unrealistic to have expected a rate cut over the last 3 months. I even think Trump knows it. Like I said, they've had one or two meetings. Trump didn't say a thing. He starts to go ballistic the other day. I mean, in typical Trump fashion, we saw this in his first term. So,
yeah,
but
I again, I think this smells exactly like, I just want you to leave.
right,
And
right,
that's
and I'll get
not
my
really
guy in there.
that's not really the plan at all. I just want you to leave, because I can't
Right,
imagine that he would take that risk. He has to know
right,
how fine of a line that the country is currently walking, um, uh, from the inflation perspective. And again, I'm not sure how the interest rates scenario spur growth for the people that put the Don in office. And
right,
like,
right,
the
exactly.
bottom line is, okay, if this is about your corporate buddies, that's great. But your corporate buddies are a bunch of technology guys who are
Yeah,
using AI to optimize their industries. So there's no job growth happening there. I outsourced your job to a do a 8 cores on a machine. Like,
and
there is
software.
no growth there. So maybe we should
Right,
talk about, where do you actually get the growth. Maybe you should
right,
take some of these funds and start talking about manufacturing, internal manufacturing, and maybe that's another industry that's changing substantially, that a bunch of
yes.
robots and AI are going to drive. But at least
Mm,
maybe you need somebody to maintain those assembly lines, and
yes,
stuff of that nature. So maybe you're getting those type of companies up and running. And the other thing is the infrastructure in the United States, the highway infrastructure in the United States, and lots of infrastructure is collapsing. And that
yes,
is a known fact, that a bunch of bridges and stuff of that nature are in have not had the maintenance and attention that they need. So, okay, maybe
right,
we need to get some highway work going again to maintain one of the greatest things that the U.S., one of the greatest advantages that the U.S. had after they built the federal highway system, which was a spiffy new transportation route across the entire country,
Right.
better than almost any country in the world. And so
Mm-hmm.
there you are.
Yep.
And I often wondered why China built all these cities instead of building just highways. Maybe it was
Right.
a highway to nowhere, but the bottom line is it was this highway infrastructure, which realistically created transportation to anywhere across your country. And
Right. Yep.
so
Yep. Yep. So that's about it. To recap, we both think it's pretty unrealistic that Trump would have expected a rate cut in the 3.5 months he's been president. We think Powell's been doing a good job. He's been reducing inflation from 9 to 2.4% for that matter, and that this might just be a play to turn up the heat on Powell so he can get his guy in there.
yep.
So. All right, let's wrap it up. You can reach us on email at onefortheroadpodcast@gmail.com. Our soon to be constructed website is onefortheroad.net. Like and subscribe to us on YouTube. Audio versions of our podcasts are available on rss.com, Podbean, and Spotify. For C Squared, this is Mr. K. Have a great week.
Thanks,
We'll
folks.
see y'all
Have a
later.
great week. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.